Victor's perspective. The kid performs, almost dancing as he tells the story. I definitely think he could have a career as an actor if he wants. I lean down to Fran and mutter, "You speak Polish, right?" Her eyes move right, but she nods without turning her head to me. "What's it like, this language he's speaking? How easy is it for you to get?" She shakes her head. "I only understand about half of it. I'm sure if it was written down for me, and I could take all the time I needed, I'd get more. But there are words from German, Czech and Slovak, Ukrainian, Hungarian, Latvian, and Lithuanian all mixed in, and even though I speak all of those languages, my brain just can't decipher the context quick enough. I'm only getting the gist." Interesting. Like listening to thick Jamaican patois as a fluent English speaker, perhaps. Or the first time I encountered Lannan Scots. Straddling that line between distinct dialect and closely related language to English. "Here in Noe Mazuri, Bleki set. So hatopeta prunzobel, he misrim vezili perez tu vezgodi. He mismi vatak na rutanek. Here matatera najaz swe strashin diwachi. Swatsi onanasvita zuzamen pod swapech. Gwydwoshim pod shepise. Kala lukdjurkshim zaplese. Zid radosi odishkansh jno jememi," concludes the kid. I applaud with everyone else. It was a good story, or at least a well-told one. Didn't get a word of it myself. We did bring translators, but, well, not only do I not want to risk permanently screwing up his developing temporal lobe or whatever, but if he already thinks we might be demons, I don't like to think about what he'd think if we tried to put some, to him, strange device on his temple. I frown as I realise something. "Hey, could I speak to you, Zon and Toon, behind the shuttle before we go?" I say to Fran. She turns to me, curious, but walks where I asked her to. I go to where my girlfriend and the tall Tshwane woman stand, and beckon them in. I look up at them to ask, "Could I just speak to you guys behind the shuttle?" Toon looks surprised. Zon doesn't. I tell everyone else that we'll set off in a few minutes, as the three of us rejoin Fran, out of sight, on the other side of the Swift Claw. Fran and Toon are looking at me puzzled. Zon looks expectant. "I think it might be a good idea if you three stay behind. What do you think?" I say. Try not to do what I did before the mission to Melino, and just tell them that they aren't coming. "If you hadn't said anything, Victor, I would have," answers Zon. "It makes sense for us to come when the goal was not to be seen, but if you're taking that kid home with the intention of showing yourselves to his community, I think we ought to make ourselves scarce." Fran looks confused and a little hurt as she asks, "Me too?" I understand Zon. Her species didn't exist when their ancestors were stranded, and I understand Toon. She's a non-Terran and we hadn't made contact when they were, but they'll surely know what Neanderthals are, won't they? "He didn't, did he?" I say, gesturing to the group to indicate the 8 or 9-year-old we need to take home. There definitely were Neanderthals about in the late 23rd century, but if there were any on board, they'll have been assimilated in the sapiens population within a generation or two. That's long enough ago that they might never have heard a description or even the word. I just don't want to do too much too fast. We should ease them into the history they missed, and the history they might have forgotten, alright? Fran frowns, but seems to see the sense, nodding. I turn to the love of my life, looking like she's doing her best not to look worried. "How about you, Toon? Is that alright with you?" She fakes a mirthful puff. "I'm fine, Victor. Really. Of course, it makes sense." "Alright," I say, gesturing for us to rejoin the group. Fran and Zon walk away, but I catch one of Toon's hands and give her the gentlest of tugs, to convey I wanted to stay for just a moment. As the other two disappear, I pull her into a warm hug, standing on my tiptoes to try and get the height I need to kiss her without making her bend. We spend several long moments locked in each other's embrace, before our lips part and I whisper, "You know I love you, right, babe?" She smiles at the reassurance and nods. I know it's not personal." "Okay, good," I grin. Powell's perspective. The red-headed giant who leads the demon band took the three most blatantly non-human demony behind the flying house before we left. When they re-emerged, those three stayed behind. Clearly he thinks they'll give them away for what they are. Interesting that he's still coming himself, though. He has a human face and proportions, but his unnatural height and bulk could give him away. Perhaps he just doesn't trust his subordinates to overtake the town without him, even with their thundersticks and sun swords. As we walk, I pretend to be entirely at ease. Not a boy captive to a demon band, just a boy walking with some humans. It's okay to lie to demony, right? They were lying to me, after all. As we're walking, my eyes fly over the bushes to our left. I'm looking for a gap that I can fit through, but they can't. I think the one I really have to worry about is the one with the leathers and furs. He's some sort of hunter demon, I think. He managed to find and navigate the brush paths almost immediately after they got here, and managed to predict exactly where to be to cut me off. He also looks skinnier than any of the others, which rules out a few gaps that I would otherwise be able to squeeze through without worrying about being followed. There! A gap that looks just the right size for me. I began lazily drifting from the group, trying to get as much of a head start as I can. If I botch this, I won't get a second chance. They'll know I'm onto them, and will be watching me too closely to let me try again. I take a deep breath, and steel myself to prepare for the cost of failing to escape. If they catch me, I have to tell the guards not to open the gate. I had to be willing to let these demoni kill me for Malbuk's sake. I burst for the gap, running the 20 meters or so faster than I ever have before. "Kid!" shouts the giant. I hear every set of feet start after me, but just too late. I dive into the gap and immediately begin struggling through it. "Kid, you're fucking hurting yourself. Don't, stop!" comes the redhead's voice at the entrance to the gap. That he's far too bulky to fit through. I make it through the dense brush and I'm sprinting, before I've even fully stood up, down one of the paths around the base of Pahorek. If I can make it to Mecklenburg, I can lose them along the paths of safety. Timantia's perspective. "What should we do?" asks Mrs. Oran. "Hack through with plasmas?" Mr. Taylor shakes his head. "We'd probably start a forest fire doing that. Danger to us aside, it ain't a great way to make contact with these people, setting their mountain on fire." Then he turns to me and points to the gap. "Reckon you can fit through?" I appraise the gap for a quarter second. "Yes, but it will be faster to go around." "Go," he orders. I don't need to be told twice. My feet carry me back to the last practical entrance to the path complex I identified. The boy will end up having a roughly 500-meter head start on me, in addition to home ground advantage, but I am the galaxy's finest hunter and tracker. I like my chances. I dive into the brush and begin flying along the paths. As I run, I'm constantly having to make decisions about which path is most likely to lead me around the mountain, and how much advantage I'll gain cutting the corner versus how much I'll lose by having to climb uphill. I decide that it's really better to try and find the other side of the escape tunnel and track him from there. I quickly come to the scuffs in the path's mud that indicate a small person running along it, and smell the boy's scent on the air, confirming he came this way recently. I follow them for a few minutes, until I come out to a wide open field, a dense forest on the other side,
and the top of an ancient colony ship visible in the far distance. I glanced side to side for any more of those predators we had to deal with, minutes after landing, but see none. The boy is a quarter of the way across the field, moving strangely. Why is he weaving and zigzagging like that? Oh, shit. It's a marsh. He's moving along paths either discovered by or made by his people that he knows and I don't. It looks like if I try to walk anywhere else, I'm going to sink and drown in the mud. Well, that complicates things. I relocate his tracks and follow them along the banks of the marsh to a point where they disappear. I look out to the marsh and see something that rekindles my hope of a successful recapture. A small scrap of cloth lies on the ground, a wooden stake driven through it. The trail is blazed, marked in such a way as to be inconspicuous to animals but obvious to people. I jink right and begin tearing down the path that illuminates itself to me, one blaze at a time. I feel sublime as I run. I realize just how much I've missed hunting. It's been months now that food has just been so freely available to me that there's been no need to hunt, even if there had been opportunities. But now I realize I've missed it. Hunting always felt like something I did because I had to, but watching the distance between me and my mark shrink, I realized that's not all there was to it. My heart is pounding like a shaman's ungtuvun as the boy reaches the entrance to the forest. He disappears, but I'm not far behind. I dodge and weave my way down the narrow paths and quickly catch sight of the boy. He turns, sees me, and shrieks at how close I am. I'm nearly on him, the end of the tunnel in sight, but then I hear something. Music. I realize the holopad that the ODR gave me when they recruited me is playing this call song. How long has it been doing that? The boy practically in my grasp, I let him go and answer the call. Abort! Abort! Comes Taylor's voice, my holo translating his words to Evenki for me. I'm sorry? Christ's sake, Tamancha, stop! It's too late. Let him go if you've caught him. It's going to look too much like a hostage situation if we go with him now. Come back. We'll work out what to do. Back at the Bright Plume. I turn to see the boy make it to the open ground outside the town, shouting, Demony! Monstery! Bells ring, and they're shouting from the walls. Alright, I'm returning now, I say, my heart sinking at not having completed my hunt. Whittle's perspective. And cough for me? I say to the 5-year-old girl, my ear pressed to her back. She coughs, and I hear an extremely foreboding rattling from her lungs. I stand up and look to Cornelia, one of the very few people in town old enough for me to have known since childhood. I give the subtlest of nods, confirming her suspicion. She doesn't react except to flick her ears to Stefania's mother. Cornelia and I agreed some time ago that this kind of diagnosis ought to be given by me instead of her. It helps her maintain a positive relationship with those she treats, and though she is far more knowledgeable than I in matters of medicine, it helps certain people accept the diagnosis more readily if it's delivered by the Ibzawi than the Osho Wichelika. Far in the distance I hear this motor alarm bell sound, but there's little I can do about that, being the frail old man. I simply have to trust that the guards can deal with it. Susanna, may I speak with you outside a moment? I say, gently, to the young woman, who's had dark bags under her eyes since her husband was killed a few months ago. Of course, Psawi, she answers, smiling with her mouth but not with her eyes. The two of us step from Cornelia's hospital. I turn to face her with lead in my stomach. It never gets any easier. Susanna, I am sorry to need to tell you this, but your daughter has pneumonia. I would guess the time she has left to be measurable in weeks, I say, solemnly, gripping my walking staff. She's dumbstruck, looking at me as if I just sentenced her daughter to death, which, from her perspective, I suppose I did. Eventually she manages, No,
Zoe, there must be something we can do. Is there anything at all? Please, if it's money, I'll find a way to pay. If it's herbs, I'll gather them. Just tell me where to look.
She gets increasingly desperate as she speaks. I hold up my hand and she falls silent. I'm afraid, Susanna, there is nothing that is within my or Cornelia's power to do.
Her voice cracks as she says, So that's it then? She's just definitely going to die? Nothing you, Cornelia, and I can do about it?
She will very likely not survive, yes, I say, trying to balance the reality that her death isn't actually certain with the fact that it is the overwhelmingly more likely outcome.
So, what should I do?
She asks, desperately looking for any guidance. I would advise making her as comfortable as you can. I don't think it's advisable for her to be brought home just now, but would happily let Cornelia overrule me on that matter. It's... At this point, a guardsman appears, running in the direction of the Plieki, and, spotting me, says, Zoe! A little irritated at having the delicate moment barged in on, I ask, What is it, boy? Out of breath, he relays, Powell, Lucas's son. He came running to the walls, shouting about monsters. If Mori are attacking, then I feel that you ought to be on the palisade and I ought not to be, lad, I say dryly. He shakes his head. No, Mori says they were demony that walked on 2 feet. Demony? I ask, cocking an eyebrow. He nods, says he told you about some blue lightning, a new star, a little hysterical, wasn't making sense. I gesture the boy to lead on and turn to Powell's mother. Are you coming? You can stay here if... I'm coming, says the woman, determination on her face. I walk on, briskly, and she follows. We cross the first palisade, and over on the second, I'm able to make out the blurry, indistinct shapes of people. As we draw closer, my eyes resolve young Powell, speaking frantically to young Retimir, though that latter not so young these days. As Susanna, the messenger, and I climb the steps, I hear Powell saying, No, you have to believe me. They were giant. One of them killed the leader of a pack of Smori like it was nothing. One of them was a 2.2 meter tall woman with blue skin and 4 arms. They were... Powell's words are cut short by Ratimir backhanding him across the face. Don't make up stories, boy. The alarms exist for a reason. You can't just raise them whenever you feel like making yourself the center of attention, shouts the blonde man furiously. Susanna rushes to put herself between her son and the man who's been unsuccessfully trying to court her since her husband's funeral. What's going on here? She demands of Ratimir. Clearly surprised at her being here, I don't think he would have struck her chair like that if he'd known she could see. He answers, Ask your boy, Susanna. He seems to have thought it would be a jolly jip to sprint across the killing field, shouting about demony. At this point, Powell sees me and pleads, Witold, tell them. I came to you this morning about the blue lightning and the star. Forgetting to call me Bzawi when around others in his desperation. Everyone looks to where I stand, supporting myself with my staff. I nod. It's true, he did. With a disgusted sneer, Ratimir responds, That just means that he planned this. What would the connection even be between these phenomena that only he saw and demony appearing? Instead of answering, I turn to Powell and ask, Powell, would you hold out your arms for me? Confused, he does as I ask, showing me his scratched up arms. Powell, says his horrified mother, what happened? Seeming to only just now be noticing the marks on his arms, the boy answers uncertainly. When I got away from them, I dived into a narrow gap in the bushes. It must have happened while I was crawling, I guess. I step to him, hold up his right arm with my left hand, and gesture to it with the index finger of my staff hand, turning to face Ratimir. Do you think he did this to himself? Without cause? To what end? Attention? Eyeing up the marked arms of the boy, the guard captain answers, "Okay, so maybe he's mad then." I smile. There's an easy way to settle this. Powell?
Yes, Bzawi?
He answers, remembering my title this time. You say you saw this demony kill a Smora? I ask calmly.
Yes, Bzawi.
He confirms. Where was this?
The northwest bank of Lake Schnadi, Bzawi.
He answers immediately. How did they kill it? Again, without having to think about it, the boy answers.
The leader had a sword made of sun stuff. He tore it through the Smora's skull. There was an explosion of steam. It left a big charred hole between his eyes.
Did the demony look like they wanted to take the Smora's carcass? He shakes his head.
It was more like they just killed it because it was in their way. They didn't seem interested in it other than that.
I return my gaze to Ratimir and smile. There you go. Go to the northwest bank of Schneide and see if there's a dead Smora with a hole burned through his skull. Then he was telling the truth, wasn't he? With a look of immense frustration, the George attender answers, "Fine, but not today." He looks up at the sky. By the time we get there, chores will be setting. Tomorrow we'll go, and when we find nothing, I'll be having a little talk with your mother about appropriate discipline, boy. The mother in question steps back between her child and the man snarling venomously at him, defiantly. Agreed. I smile with a tone that tells all that the matter is settled, for now at least, before genially adding, "Come now, Susanna, young Powell. I shall walk you home." Ratimir stares daggers at the boy as we go.
I'm sorry, Mammo,
says the boy once we're out of earshot.
I didn't mean to make trouble for you.
She cuddles and shushes the child, who will soon be the only family she has left, kissing the top of his head as we walk. We walk for some minutes until we reach the house built by Lucas and Susanna when they were in their late teens. I turn to the boy and his mother and say, "I know it's terrible manners to invite oneself inside, but I was wondering if I might come in. I would like to hear more about this demony from young Powell."